Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, V. Thanks for having me.
So you've been a serial entrepreneur. You started 4 businesses, sold some to Fortune 100 companies, and now you're writing a book, The Purpose is Profit, The Truth About Starting and Building Your Own Business. Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, first, I felt like there was a message that needed to be communicated about how to motivate entrepreneurs to start businesses with profit in mind from the get-go. That was one of the key points of the book. We got so enthused about our writing as we studied the history of startups. There's a great failure rate. About 80% fail, 20% succeed. And we thought if we could write a book that would flip that 80-20 rule, where it was a 20% failure, 80% success, we would really have something. And I felt like we had a real message to convey to help flip that 80-20 rule.
Mm-hmm. How will this book help entrepreneurs and those people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs? What's the theme of the book?
The theme of the book is profit. The purpose is profit. And that's a little bit controversial because nowadays, when folks start businesses, they're thinking purpose and profit. And my feeling is you need to make a profit to underwrite your purpose. If you start a business that has a wonderful purpose but it doesn't make a profit, it's probably not going to be around for long. So one of the things we say is organize yourself to make a profit in all the decisions that you make, and that will underwrite a sustainable business. It'll underwrite the cost of your employee base. It will underwrite your ability to fulfill your business vision, and it will underwrite your ability to give back or serve the purpose.
So certainly entrepreneurs and people who are thinking about starting businesses would benefit from reading this book. Anybody else who might benefit from reading the book?
I would say there's always a question about entrepreneurs, people that want to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs. And I think this really serves the first group, the folks that are desiring of starting a business, but concerned about the risk and the failure rate, and frankly, putting their money behind something and being worried about a bad outcome. Certainly, a number of entrepreneurs that run successful businesses read sections of the book, and they've basically given their endorsement and said, this is very valuable and really reinforces the major learning points or messages you need to run a successful business.
Section 1 of your book starts out by talking about the push and the pull, the idea of starting a business. Tell us more.
For years, I had a goal of starting my own business. I carried around a promise in my pocket that I would start a business. I was so frustrated about getting on with it that I had a witness sign the little covenant that I made with myself. So I definitely had the pull towards entrepreneurship. But this concept of the push is this whole idea of things happen in your life, whether it's an issue with a boss, an obstacle at work, or some other aspect, also kind of comes into play where, frankly, you make the decision, I've got the pull, I've got the push, it's time for me to take the step and make it happen. And that happened for me in 1991. And
tell us more about that. What happened in 1991?
Well, specifically, I was a producer for a large development company called Trammell Crow Company. And I was working on an assignment that caused me to travel pretty much Monday through Friday. And I went into the office on a Saturday, and I came across a piece of paper on the copier. And it had our business model going forward, and 2 of the 3 variations had me cut from staff. So I approached my boss and said, what's this? And he said, it's too bad you saw that. But it really, that for me was the push that finally made me decide I'm going to start my own business, because if the level of investment that I was making and the performance that I was producing wasn't enough, it was time for me to start my own thing.
How old were you when you started your own business?
Surprisingly, I was 36, which many entrepreneurs would find that to be on the later side. I had 2 children, a third on the way. I had a lot of obligation and responsibility. I had been in the corporate world for probably 15 years between IBM, Hewlett-Packard, and Trammell Crow Company. I had been setting aside money to buy a home, and as things evolved, I spoke with my wife and said, we need to take that money and we need to put it behind this business. We need to move from the house we're in to a smaller place, and we need to lift this business off, and that's exactly what we did at 36 years old.
Tell us about some factors that would increase the likelihood of startup success at the pre-launch stage.
The first thing is, and probably one of the major themes in the book, is this whole concept of distinctive competence. In other words, some unique talent, skill, or experience that you have that's truly different than is generally available in the market. If you build a business around your distinctive competence, you have a much higher probability of success. I would say that would be number one. Number two would be this whole concept of developing a business model, but then testing it before you actually launch. Getting customer feedback, securing pre-orders. In my case, we started our business in Stamford, Connecticut. Our first 2 customers were in Minneapolis, out in Minnesota. One company was called Patterson Dental Company. The other was American Express Financial Advisors. Basically asked for the pre-order, and in both cases, the principals involved said, we're going to stick with you. We know what you're capable of. And within 2 weeks of our formal launch date, we got formal contracts from both of them. And so we had a business idea, we built the model, we secured the pre-orders, and then, of course, we had our fingers crossed that they would follow through and actually give us the contracts that they had committed. And sure enough, they did. And a lot of that was built around this whole concept of distinctive competence. In other words, they felt like I could take them to the promised land, particularly in the field that we were competing in, which was real estate outsourcing.
You also talk about the difference between corporate branding and entrepreneurial branding in your book. Tell us the difference between both and why are they both important?
I think when an individual decides to start their own business, they have a vision for what they're creating. And they bring other team members onto the team. But I believe that the entrepreneur needs to take responsibility for the whole branding process to ensure that the whole image, the way the company's held out, it lives up to the future vision of the business. In a corporate sense, many times branding in a larger company is by committee with outside consultants and getting basically consensus. My belief is entrepreneurial branding is the realization of the entrepreneur's vision in the brand that they create, and they need to take ownership of that.
You also say in your book that you think bootstrapping your business is best. Number one, tell us why, and number two, what advice do you give to people who can't bootstrap and need to find outside investors?
Okay. If you've been working for someone else, a large corporation, and you step out on your own, most of the time, the biggest reason why folks step out on their own is because they want to have control. And if you take the step to set up your own business and you want to have control of your destiny and control of your future, if you bootstrap your business with your own pocketbook, you're maximizing control. When you use what I call OPM, other people's money, sometimes whether it's a venture capital or debt or whatever form of outside capital, you're moving more into a situation where you have to consider the inputs of others. And one of the big risk factors, if you take too much funding from outside sources, is you can quickly give away too much equity and find yourselves working for somebody else down the road. Now, I'm an angel investor as well, and one of the things that I make clear on any of my angel investments is I make it crystal clear I want the entrepreneur to have the far majority of the equity, because one of their aspirations is to have control, and I believe so much in the entrepreneur having control that I would only want a minority stake.
And your advice to people who aren't able to bootstrap and do have to seek outside investment, what would you advise them?
My advice would be challenge yourself. Think through, if you're in the pre-launch phase of a business, you have a big idea, take it as far as you can before you seek outside capital. If you do that and you prove your business model before, you'll be in a much stronger negotiation position when you do seek outside capital. You'll have proof of concept, you'll have a business plan, a business vision, you may even have some pre-orders. That puts you in a much stronger negotiation position when you're sourcing outside capital or venture funding.
You also talk about some of your startup failures in your book. Give us an example and some lessons learned from that.
Sure. When I started my business, again, it was called USI, Real Estate Outsourcing Business. And that was going to be the smaller business. The bigger business was going to be a magazine that we were publishing, planning to publish. It was called the National Register of Commercial Real Estate. It had a centerpiece in the magazine called the Commercial Property Exchange. The idea behind the magazine was to bring together buyers and sellers to be able to view properties from all around the world. One of the first learning points in developing a magazine is it's great if you have publishing experience. Well, I had none. So I broke rule number one, which was, do you have distinctive competence in the field you're going into? I did not have that. The second thing that I learned is lifting off a magazine can take years to become profitable. We started out, because we had success in bootstrapping the real estate business, we took all the profits from the real estate business and said, we're going to bootstrap this magazine business. Basically, we took all the profits from the real estate business for 3 years until finally we looked in the mirror and realized we do not have enough capital. But it was too late to go source capital from third parties because we were running out of gas. So the first rule was I didn't have distinctive competence. The second, I didn't have enough capital to take us where we needed to go, and I wasn't smart enough to balance my interest in bootstrapping with being realistic about how much capital I really needed. Lastly, I was fortunate and I had advisors, and one of the advisors was the ex-chairman of Time Warner, a guy named Dick Monroe. And I sat down with him. He was a neighbor. He had just become chairman emeritus of Time Warner, and I went down to see him. He was a neighbor in our first office location, and he said, sure, I'll give you advice. He said, but let me tell you one thing you need to know. Sports Illustrated did not make a profit for 6 years. Are you prepared to gut it out in the trenches for 6 years? And instead of listening to my advisor, I thought, I can bootstrap this myself. And ultimately, that's a situation where we should have gone for venture funding. I should have listened to my advisor, and we didn't. So there are many lessons learned. As a matter of fact, there's a chapter in the book called The Passion Project. And the point of this chapter is distinctive competence trumps passion all the time. In other words, An ideal business startup is one where you have distinctive competence and you have passion. But if you only have one, it should be distinctive competence. Passion alone will not ensure your success.
And section 3 of your book talks about the growth stage and a sales team and how you used 10 profit principles to make consistent profits at one of your companies, USI.
Right.
Tell us more.
I think a classic mistake that many entrepreneurs make is they take the position that my product will sell itself. And maybe it's because I come from a sales background, but I'm not a real believer in that. I think a product needs a dedicated force behind it, bringing it to the customer and securing orders. And that can come in many flavors. That can be online, that can be mobile, that can be face-to-face. But I think the idea of a product completely sells itself is really the exception, not the rule. And so we've written a whole chapter around this concept of sales as a contact sport, meaning we're making contact and we're going to create business together. So I'm a big believer in the sales force. In regards to the 10 profit principles, I took a step back and asked myself, what really drove the profit of our business? And the chapter's called The 10 Commandments of Profit. And we outlined 10 specific items that if you really wanted to flip the failure rate, 20% success, 80% failure, to 80% success, 20% failure, you would follow these profit principles. Probably one of the dominant profit principles is to organize your reward system around profit. If you organize your reward system around profit, then everybody becomes a profit and loss manager. And you're never faced with the issue of a product or a service being sold where it's being sold at a loss, but they still get a commission. If they're paid off the bottom line, both your sales force and your management team, then everybody across the organization is concerned about revenue minus expense equals profit. And if there's profit there, there's going to be some reward.
What are some key lessons that you learned when it came to exiting your startups?
The biggest lesson that I learned, we took USI from a startup, bootstrap, to an Inc. 500 company. It was very fast growth. We had 40% compounded growth. We never had any debt. We funded it all ourselves. And one day we applied and became an Inc. 500 company, which is based on revenue growth. And a few years later, we got a knock on the door from a Fortune 100 company, Johnson Controls, and they said, we want to buy your business, lock, stock, and barrel. And we wound up putting a deal together, and a lot of our effort was focused on putting the terms of the deal together as it related to selling the business. We weren't thinking about life after the sale as much. So my message to entrepreneurs is there's two parts to a deal on an exit. One part is value realization, and the other part is life after the sale. And if there's one thing that I would have done differently is I would have been more sensitive to life after the sale. Not to say that Johnson Controls isn't a terrific company, but when you're running an entrepreneurial business, you're responsible for all the main functions of the business. In a large corporation, some of those functions are pulled away from you, such as marketing, such as human resources, such as technology. And frankly, those three components played a big role in our success.
You also wrote another book, The Startup Roadmap, 21 Steps to Profitability, which you're including in this book. Tell us how this is going to help entrepreneurs.
We decided to write a book called The Purpose is Profit. And we wanted to build it around one company and the arc of this one company, from startup to growth to exit. In the process of doing that, we started to get into the mechanics of what makes a business successful, the real gears and levers of what you need to do as an entrepreneur to increase your probability of startup success. So as we were writing and we were working with our editors, one of the editors said, that material does not necessarily follow the story, but it's very important information. It's really talking about the mechanics of what it takes to start and build a business. I think you should create a separate manual or an appendix to the book that includes this product, which we've separately branded the Startup Roadmap, 21 Steps to Profitability. And basically what we're doing there is we're creating something that an entrepreneur can take and use as a checkpoint, 21 steps. I believe if you follow those 21 steps, you will have the success, you will increase your probability of startup success by about 80%. A couple of points of note. Recently, we've been receiving endorsements, and one of the endorsements that I found to be very powerful was this gentleman with Barrow Capital said, I really like your book. Many of the other books, including Peter Thiel's new book, as well as The Hard Things About Hard Things, another very successful book right now about entrepreneurship, give anecdotal evidence, and they pointed out that this is a step-by-step roadmap of how to build a business. So we were pretty pleased about that. And one other gentleman wrote to us from USC Business School, Marshall Business School, and said, I read your startup roadmap and I wish I had gotten a copy of it. I could have saved $150,000 in tuition payments. So we've been getting a lot of traction and a lot of endorsement. It's a separate book, but it will also be a part of The Purpose is Profit.
What types of things were you looking for when you formed your core leadership team, and how important is it to have a partner when you're developing a business?
First, in regards to having people with you in the trenches when you're lifting off, it's absolutely critical. I'm a very big believer. I think it's, I wouldn't recommend anybody start a business to just be by themselves. And I know there are businesses that are run by one person, but the idea, if you're planning on scaling your business and you want to have ideas and inputs of others, and you want to deal with the successes together and the setbacks together, it's nice to have a team that you can rely on. When I started my business, we started out as a team of 3. I was responsible for, if you will, the lead marketing and the strategy. Another gentleman was responsible for the service fulfillment and execution, and the other person was responsible for the administration of the business. As far as the leadership team, what I looked for was, and maybe this came from the fact that I was 36 when I started, and I had already worked for large firms and gotten excellent training from IBM and Hewlett-Packard, and I had risen in the ranks, that I knew the value of fresh thinking and how important that could be. So once we got beyond the original 3 folks, I really started to recruit people that would challenge almost everything that we were doing, and many of the hiring were creating whole new product lines and asking them to take the whole responsibility for the product line, what was being offered, how it was being priced, how it would be profitable, almost in effect creating a whole new business line within the overall business. And we had really great success. I call that lightning in a bottle, and we had 4 folks in particular that really played a key role in the development of our business.
What behaviors and traits did you look for when you were hiring people?
I wanted to make sure there were folks that were entrepreneurial, that wanted to take responsibility for an area, and bottom line responsibility for growing a large chunk of the business, whether it was a product line or a geographic territory. and I wanted people to challenge the status quo, particularly in our leadership team.
What were some of the must-ask questions that you had when you were actually hiring employees? Was there a specific question or some questions that you had that you said, you know, these are the questions I need to have to make sure you get the response that you're looking for?
I think we did some really cool things in that area. One thing was when we would interview, we probably had people have 10 interviews, even in a small company. The whole idea was we made a decision that we never wanted to hire anybody where the day after they started, they said, wow, I had no idea I was going to be doing this. We wanted them to know absolutely everything about our culture, who they were reporting to, how they would be compensated, what type of work they would be doing, what they would be held accountable to deliver, because when we hired people, we did not want there to be any mystery about it. And it made for great morale within the troops, because no one ever felt like they were brought on board to do one thing, and in fact they wound up doing something else. And that helps, because the highest value of an employee is when they know exactly what they're doing. It maximizes their productivity. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know exactly how I'm going to be rewarded. I know exactly who I'm going to work with. I think employees become disgruntled when there's confusion about their role, their accountability, their compensation, and we documented everything. And that played a big role in our hiring.
How is it that you establish a culture for the organizations that you've created? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Because I was 36 years old and I had other experiences, good and bad, I was very, very sensitive to this whole idea of making it crystal clear, particularly around reward. I had come from an environment where the reward kept changing, and it had me constantly looking over my shoulder, and I just said, I will never do that to anyone. There's plenty of money to be made by making it crystal clear how you're going to reward somebody, so document it, agree on it, stick with it. So one of the things that we focused on was documenting all of our agreements up front, and not changing them just because we hit on a tough time or something like that. The second thing we did culture-wise is we decided we were not going to use lawyers to fight legal issues. What we were going to do is the old-fashioned. We were going to, if we made a mistake, we were going to say we were sorry. And if it was a big mistake, we were going to make reparation. And we built tremendous trust with our customers by the old-fashioned, if you make a mistake, say you're sorry. And I used to make presentations going around the country, and one of the messages that I always conveyed is, inevitably, the folks that I was meeting with, if a mistake is made, acknowledge it, raise your hand. We understand. Mistakes will be made. And it saved us millions of dollars. And it made people feel more comfortable in their role. And they would own up and say, hey, we made a mistake. And sometimes it was costly. But we never were in a courtroom in 14 years. And we had a 98% contract renewal rate. So there was a real bond with our employees and our customers, because they knew honesty was a big part of our business model.
Tell us what your most successful form of marketing was for your 4 businesses.
Sure. The number one thing that I believe in is customer testimonial. If we saved a customer money, created value, made their life better, made their life easier, improved the value of their role within their own corporation, we wanted to document that and get it into a testimonial. And we used to run full-page ads in CFO magazine, taking a picture of our customer with them communicating why working with us was one of their best business decisions. Now that serves a couple of purposes. First, when you have an ad in a public magazine, it says a lot to other CFOs and other heads of real estate that wow, why would they say that? And put their name and their picture in print and acknowledge the success that they've had if they didn't really have it. So that was one benefit. The other benefit is, frankly, it locked them into position. They couldn't later say, we really didn't save, because you could point to the magazine ad and say, well, wait a minute, you really did. You know, you said it. And we really weren't worried about that, but testimonial was the most powerful marketing thing that we had done.
How did you get the ideas for your 4 businesses? Were there any needs that you were filling? Tell us more about the ideas.
Well, I believe all of the businesses served a need. To me, I kind of found that as fundamental, but you're right. You know, some people don't think about that. At 36 years old with 2 children and 1 on the way, I didn't have the luxury of trying something that didn't have a high probability of success. I had to put food on the table, pay for tuitions, pay the rent, and I was loaded with obligations. So the whole idea of proving your idea, it came second nature. I believe here's a need. I would ask customers if in fact this service or product would solve that need. If they said yes, then I would try and transition that into a pre-order contract, and then I would start up. I did that in 3 of the 4 businesses which have been successful. The one business that I did not do it and fully follow through was the magazine that I talked about earlier. I got validation that the idea was appropriate, but I never asked for the pre-order. And after I lifted the magazine off, revenue was slow in coming because they didn't necessarily believe that it was worth spending the money to underwrite what I was offering.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the 4 businesses that you started.
One business, the first business, was a real estate outsourcing business. It was a classic B2B business, business to business. I felt comfortable in that environment because I came from it. I saw a tremendous need for a non-core service area like real estate to be outsourced. That was probably the first business. The second was there was a oversupply or surplus of real estate flooding the market in the early 90s. And I just thought, wow, there's got to be a better way to connect buyer and seller to make the world aware of what's available. And that was the magazine business. I do believe there was a need there, but that business, I did not secure the pre-orders. I didn't have the distinctive competence, as I mentioned, and that business ultimately failed. The other business was a technology business, and it was a natural offshoot of the real estate service business. The product that we developed is called Sequential Solutions. It was set up as a separate company. It was sold as a software as a service, and it's still sold today, and it's one of the dominant solutions in the commercial real estate services industry for corporations. The last business is my current business, which is called Blue Sunsets LLC. It basically does 3 things. It does real estate development projects. It invests as an angel investor in startups and small businesses, and it publishes the books that we're publishing.
What would you say are some of the skills needed to be a successful entrepreneur?
The other day I had the TV on in the background, and Marcus Lemonis, the prophet from CNBC, was on. And he said something, and it really rang true to me, which is you have to have an appetite for risk. I think that's really true. There's a lot of people that talk about starting a business, but their willingness to take the risk and hold themselves out there. And it's not right for everybody. But I do think you have to have an appetite for risk, and I would say far and away that's the number one thing.
You worked for many large companies prior to starting your businesses, IBM, Hewlett-Packard. Tell us some of the reasons why you decided to leave the comforts of working for a big organization to start something on your own.
I just seem to have it in my blood. And when I worked in large corporations, and in certain instances, you know, here's how you dress, here's how you act, here's what you say, I just started to feel like I wanted to be in control of the way in which work got done. I felt like I might have a better way, and I didn't always want to follow the same model. So I was bumping up against those things, and that combined with my vision to leave and start my own business made me decide the right thing for me is to run my own show, basically.
If you had the chance to start your career over, what would you do differently?
I loved the things I learned in the corporate life, but I should have started my business sooner. It was much more rewarding, having control of my destiny, leading the charge, building something. That would be something that I would definitely do earlier. Also, frankly, the path to wealth creation is individual ownership. I believe that. You can certainly make great money working for someone else, but there's nothing more rewarding than being in control and building real wealth.
What was both your most favorite and least favorite parts about being an entrepreneur?
Probably the most favorite part was when we sold the business, realizing the value that we had created. For a long time, I never let myself think that what we were creating had much more worth than the amount of capital that I had in the business. And businesses obviously are valued based on multiples of earnings or multiples of revenue. I never thought that way. We retained a large amount of cash in retained earnings, and I really simply just thought that's what the business is worth, because I was always worried about a rainy day or an issue coming up. When Johnson Controls came along and we hired an investment banker and put an information memorandum out to the market, we had 15 bidders, all communicating interest in buying the business with a specific price. And it made me realize, wow, we had really built something of value. And so I would say that was number one. As far as least favorite, you know, I love entrepreneurship. I can't think of anything. Maybe the only thing would be we did a great job of interviewing, but inevitably sometimes didn't necessarily hire the quality of the person that we needed, and we had to separate. And that's always difficult because you want it to work, and it can be painful because one part or the other can really try and hold on.
To what do you attribute your success?
I think sacrifice, willingness to sacrifice, maybe more than anything else. I guess falling under sacrifice is work ethic. I would do anything that I could to satisfy my customer. I would do anything I could to build our business, and that all came in the form of sacrifice. Sacrifice in my lifestyle. When I started my business, I downsized it very substantially, to a point where, frankly, I had some old neighbors visit. They walked into the new place we were living in, which was kind of the house behind the house, and they were surprised. You could see it. It was almost embarrassing that they thought, wow, the wheels have really come off on your life, when in reality we were building something for the future. So I would say that sacrifice is the big thing, that if you want to have control and you want to have a shot at genuine wealth creation, you've got to make the sacrifice. And if you're willing to do that, I definitely think you can increase the probability of startup success.
What's been your most satisfying moment in business?
I'd say probably two or three things. One, I mentioned already, the realization of the value that we had created. The other is, right after we sold the business, Johnson Controls came to me within 2 weeks afterwards and said, we want you to lead the combined business, not just your business, but our business. And it was a big business. It was probably somewhere in the order of $1.5 billion, and it had about 5,000 people through North and South America. They also asked my second in command to lead all their European operations, which was an equivalent $1.5 billion business. So it was very rewarding to see all the people that were our first line management took senior level positions within the acquiring company.
Excluding your own, what company or business do you admire most?
I hope this doesn't come across as a non-answer, but I admire any entrepreneur that starts a business, that runs it ethically, that lives up to their word and fulfills the promise to their customers and makes a profit. I could certainly point to other businesses that are popular, Facebook, Amazon, and so on, but I really think that anybody who steps out on their own and offers value and delivers against it and does it in a high integrity way and makes a profit, that's the kind of folks that I look up to.
What book has inspired you the most?
The other day I was looking at TV and I saw a famous businessman. They were doing a biography, and I remembered that I had read the biography of this guy, and his name was Lee Iacocca. And he was a phenomenal marketing leader, dynamo, and his biography was fantastic. If you remember, he saved Chrysler from failure. He saved the Statue of Liberty. So that book and the role that he played in America was just phenomenal.
If you had to characterize your life as an entrepreneur in one word, what would that be?
Sacrifice.
Well, great. Thank you, Ed, for joining us.
Well,
It's really
thanks.
good.